The splatter of crimson paint dripped down Maya's face like tears of humiliation, each drop carrying the weight of months of torment. Standing in the middle of Jefferson High's main courtyard, surrounded by a circle of laughing faces and pointing fingers, she felt the familiar burn of shame creep up her neck. The thick acrylic paint clung to her dark hair, transforming her carefully braided locks into a sticky mess that would take hours to wash out. Her favorite yellow sweater, the one her grandmother had knitted for her 16th birthday, was now a canvas of destruction. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But what none of those jeering students knew, what none of them could have possibly imagined, was that beneath Maya's trembling exterior lay the heart of a warrior. Years of training had sculpted not just her body, but her mind into a weapon of precision and power. The shy girl they thought they knew was about to become their worst nightmare. The morning had started like any other Tuesday at Jefferson High School in Riverside, California. Chen had arrived early, clutching her worn leather backpack against her chest as she navigated through the parking lot filled with expensive cars that belonged to students whose parents could afford luxuries her family could only dream of. The October air carried a crisp bite that made her pull her yellow sweater tighter around her small frame. At 5 feet 3 inches and barely 110 pounds, Maya had learned to make herself invisible in the sprawling hallways of one of the state's most prestigious public schools. She had been attending Jefferson for exactly 4 months and 2 weeks, ever since her mother's job transfer had uprooted them from their quiet life in Portland, Oregon. The adjustment had been brutal in ways Maya never anticipated. Back in Portland, she had been just another face in the crowd at Lincoln High, content to blend into the background while focusing on her studies and her secret passion that consumed her evenings and weekends. Here at Jefferson, with its perfectly manicured lawns and state-of-the-art facilities, Maya felt like an alien trying to understand a foreign culture. The student body at Jefferson was a complex ecosystem of social hierarchies that seemed to shift and change with the seasons. There were the athletes who commanded respect through their achievements on various fields and courts, the academic elites who wore their perfect GPAs like badges of honor, the theater kids who expressed themselves through dramatic flair, and the social media influencers who documented every moment of their seemingly perfect lives. Then there were students like Maya, who existed in the spaces between these defined groups, trying to navigate each day without drawing unwanted attention. Maya's first few weeks had been relatively peaceful. She had found a quiet corner table in the library during lunch, discovered which bathrooms were least crowded between classes, and mapped out routes through the hallways that avoided the most popular gathering spots. Her teachers appreciated her diligent work ethic and respectful demeanor, often using her as an example when other students struggled with assignments. She'd even managed to make a tentative friendship with Emma Rodriguez, a fellow junior who shared her love of literature and quiet conversations about books. The trouble had started in early September when Maya accidentally bumped into Brittany Sterling in the chemistry lab. Brittany was everything Maya was not: tall, blonde, confident, and surrounded by a loyal group of followers who hung on her every word. She was the daughter of a prominent real estate developer and had grown up in Riverside's most exclusive neighborhood. Her Instagram account boasted over 50,000 followers, and she had already received preliminary interest from several modeling agencies. In the rigid social structure of Jefferson High, Brittany was undisputed royalty. The collision had been truly accidental. Maya had been carrying a tray of beakers filled with various solutions when another student had bumped into her from behind, causing her to stumble forward directly into Brittany's path. The resulting crash had sent chemicals splashing across. Brittany's designer jeans and expensive boots While Maya had immediately begun apologizing profusely and offering to pay for any damage, Brittany's reaction had been swift and merciless. The humiliation had been public and calculated. Brittany had raised her voice just enough to draw the attention of nearby students, describing Maya as clumsy and careless in terms that left no room for misinterpretation. She had made comments about Maya's thrift store clothing and second-hand backpack, observations that cut deeper than any physical blow. The incident had lasted less than 5 minutes, but its effects had rippled through Maya's daily life like stones thrown into still water. Since that day, Maya had found herself the target of what could only be described as a systematic campaign of harassment. It started small. Whispered comments as she walked past Brittany's table in the cafeteria, deliberate shoulder bumps in crowded hallways, and the occasional mocking laugh when she answered questions in class. Maya had hoped that if she kept her head down and avoided any further confrontations, the attention would eventually fade as Brittany moved on to other targets. Instead, the harassment had escalated. Someone had started leaving notes in Maya's locker, messages that critiqued everything from her appearance to her family's financial situation. Her gym clothes had been hidden multiple times, forcing her to sit out activities and earn disapproving looks from Coach Martinez. During group projects, Maya often found herself working alone when other students suddenly claimed their groups were full, leaving her to complete assignments meant for teams of 4 or 5 people. The psychological toll had been devastating. Maya's grades, while still respectable, had begun to slip as she found it increasingly difficult to concentrate during classes. She had trouble sleeping, often lying awake replaying the day's humiliations and dreading what tomorrow might bring. Her appetite had diminished, and her mother had begun to notice the weight loss and the dark circles under her eyes. When asked about school, Maya had perfected the art of deflection, offering vague reassurances about adjustment periods and the normal challenges of being the new student. What made the situation particularly painful was Maya's awareness of her own capabilities. Back in Portland, she had been training at Championship Kickboxing Academy for over 6 years under the guidance of Master David Kim, a former professional fighter who had represented the United States in international competitions. Maya had discovered kickboxing by accident when she was 10 years old, tagging along with her older cousin to a trial class at the local community center. The moment she had thrown her first punch at the heavy bag, something had awakened inside her. The training had been intense and demanding. Master Kim had recognized Maya's natural talent early on, noting her exceptional balance, her ability to learn complex combinations quickly, and her fierce determination to improve. He had pushed her harder than many of his other students, designing personalized training routines that challenged both her physical and mental limits. Maya had embraced every aspect of the discipline, the endless hours of conditioning, the technical precision required for proper form, the mental focus needed to execute combinations under pressure. By the time she was 14, Maya had been competing in regional tournaments, consistently placing in the top 3 in her weight and age divisions. Her bedroom wall back in Portland had been covered with ribbons and trophies, evidence of countless hours spent perfecting her craft. She had been preparing for her black belt test when her mother had announced the job transfer, effectively ending her competitive career just as she was reaching her peak performance. The decision to keep her kickboxing background secret at Jefferson had been strategic rather than shameful. Maya had learned from experience that people often reacted strangely when they discovered her fighting abilities. Some became intimidated, treating her as if she were dangerous or unpredictable. Others wanted to test her skills, challenging her to demonstrate techniques or prove her claims. A few had tried to use her reputation as a fighter to their advantage, suggesting she could help them with their own conflicts. Maya had grown tired of being defined by her athletic abilities rather than being appreciated for her intelligence, creativity, or sense of humor, At Jefferson, she had wanted a fresh start. She had envisioned herself as a regular student who happened to be good at academics, someone who could participate in debate club or volunteer for community service projects, without constantly fielding questions about fighting and training. The irony was not lost on her that her desire to be seen as more than just her physical capabilities had left her vulnerable to exactly the kind of situation where those capabilities would have been most valuable. Emma Rodriguez had been Maya's first and only real friend at Jefferson. They had met during orientation week when both had signed up for the same advanced placement literature course. Emma was a thoughtful, introspective girl who preferred reading classic novels to scrolling through social media. She had grown up in Riverside, but had always felt somewhat disconnected from the materialism and social climbing that seemed to dominate teenage culture in their affluent community. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her parents had immigrated from Mexico when she was very young, working multiple jobs to provide their children with educational opportunities they had never had themselves. Emma had noticed the changes in Maya's behavior over the past month. Where Maya had once been eager to discuss the books they were reading in English class, she now seemed distracted and withdrawn. Their lunch conversations had become stilted and brief, with Maya frequently glancing over her shoulder as if expecting some kind of ambush. When Emma had asked directly if everything was okay, Maya had insisted she was fine, just adjusting to the increased academic demands of her advanced placement courses. The truth was that Maya had been terrified of involving Emma in her problems with Brittany. She had witnessed firsthand how quickly Brittany's circle could turn on anyone who associated with their targets. Maya had seen other students, suddenly, find themselves excluded from social events, subjected to cruel rumors, or worse, simply because they had shown kindness to someone Brittany had marked for harassment. The last thing Maya wanted was to drag Emma into the nightmare her daily life had become. That Tuesday morning had started with what Maya had hoped would be a reprieve. Brittany had been absent from first period English, and Maya had allowed herself to relax slightly during the class discussion about symbolism in The Great Gatsby. She had even volunteered to read a passage aloud, something she had avoided doing for weeks due to fear of drawing attention to herself. Mrs. Patterson had praised her insight into the text, and for 45 minutes, Maya had felt like a normal student again. The feeling had lasted through second period chemistry, where Mr. Johnson had returned their latest lab reports. Maya had earned an A+, her detailed analysis and careful observations earning written praise in the margins. She had packed up her materials with something approaching optimism, thinking that perhaps the worst of her troubles were behind her. Brittany's absence seemed to have lifted some invisible weight from the classroom atmosphere, and other students had been more relaxed and friendly than usual. Third period was Maya's free study hall, which she typically spent in the library working on homework or reading ahead in her textbooks. The library at Jefferson was truly impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows that provided natural light for studying and comfortable seating areas that encouraged students to spend time reading. Maya had claimed a small table near the back corner, surrounded by shelves of classic literature that reminded her of happier times. She had been working on calculus problems when her phone had buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message was brief but ominous. "Courtyard now, time to pay for what you did." Maya had stared at the screen, her hands beginning to shake as she realized that Brittany's absence from first period had not been due to illness or family obligation. She had been planning something, and whatever it was about to happen. Maya had tried to convince herself that ignoring the message was the best strategy. She had no obligation to respond to anonymous texts, and leaving the safety of the library seemed like walking directly into a trap. But as minutes passed, more Messages had arrived, each one more threatening than the last. The final message had included a photo taken from outside the library, showing Maya sitting at her usual table, making it clear that someone was watching her. The walk from the library to the main courtyard had felt like a death march. Maya's legs had felt heavy and unsteady, and her heart had been pounding so hard she was certain other students could hear it. The courtyard was the social hub of Jefferson High, a large open space surrounded by classroom buildings where students gathered between classes and during lunch periods. It was also the most public area on campus, which meant that whatever Brittany had planned would have maximum visibility. Maya had arrived to find a crowd already gathered, forming a loose circle around the central fountain. Brittany stood at the center, flanked by her usual group of followers: Jessica Walsh, Madison Cooper, and Ashley Park. Each of them held a container that Maya had not immediately recognized, but the malicious grins on their faces had made her stomach turn with dread. The crowd was larger than usual, suggesting that word of whatever was about to happen had spread through the school's efficient gossip network. Brittany had been dressed perfectly as always, her blonde hair styled in loose waves that caught the sunlight, her outfit consisting of designer pieces that cost more than Maya's family spent on groceries in a month. Her smile had been bright and predatory as she had addressed the gathered crowd with the confidence of someone who had never experienced real consequences for her actions. "Everyone, I want you to meet Maya Chen," Brittany had announced, her voice carrying easily across the courtyard. "She's been at our school for a few months now, and I think it's time we gave her a proper Jefferson High welcome." The crowd had shifted nervously, sensing that whatever was about to happen would cross lines that most of them were not comfortable crossing. But the social dynamics of high school had held them in place, none willing to be the first to walk away and risk becoming the next target. Maya had felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that she had experienced countless times in the kickboxing ring. But this was different. In competition, the adrenaline had been channeled into focus and precision. It felt more like panic, her body's fight-or-flight response triggered by a situation where neither option seemed viable. Fighting would confirm every negative stereotype about her and potentially get her expelled. Fleeing would provide temporary relief, but would only delay the inevitable confrontation. "You see," Brittany had continued, pacing around Maya like a predator circling wounded prey, "Maya here thinks she's better than the rest of us. She walks around with her nose in the air, acting like she's too good to participate in school spirit, activities, or social events. I think she needs an attitude adjustment, don't you?" The question had been directed at the crowd, many of whom had nodded uncertainly, caught up in the mob mentality that Brittany had skillfully cultivated. Maya had tried to speak, to defend herself, or at least ask what she had done to deserve such treatment, but her voice had come out as barely a whisper. The public setting, the hostile crowd, and the anticipation of whatever humiliation Brittany had planned had combined to rob her of her usual composure. She had stood frozen, like a deer caught in headlights, waiting for the inevitable blow. "Since Maya clearly doesn't appreciate the school colors," Brittany had said, gesturing to her followers who had raised their containers in response, "we thought we'd help her show some school spirit." The containers, Maya had realized with growing horror, were filled with paint in Jefferson High's colors: crimson, red, and gold. The paint appeared to be the thick, fast-drying type used for art projects, the kind that would be nearly impossible to wash out of clothing or hair. The first splash had caught Maya completely off guard. Jessica had stepped forward and dumped an entire container of red paint over Maya's head, the thick liquid immediately soaking through her hair and running down her face. The shock of it had been overwhelming. The weight of the paint, the chemical smell, the gasps and laughter from the crowd. Maya had instinctively closed her eyes and mouth, but the paint had still managed to coat her face and neck. Before she could react or even process what had happened, Madison had followed with a container of gold paint aimed at Maya's torso. The impact had been forceful enough to make Maya stumble backward, the paint splattering across her yellow sweater and creating an abstract pattern of destruction. Ashley had completed the assault with another container of red paint, this one aimed at Maya's legs and backpack, ensuring that every visible part of her was covered in the thick, dripping mess. The courtyard had erupted in a mixture of shocked gasps, nervous laughter, and the excited chatter of students who had just witnessed something that would be talked about for weeks. Cell phones had appeared instantly, dozens of cameras capturing Maya's humiliation from every angle. The videos and photos would be uploaded to social media within minutes, ensuring that her degradation would be preserved and shared far beyond the boundaries of Jefferson High. Maya had stood there, dripping paint onto the concrete, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. The paint had been cold against her skin, and she could feel it beginning to harden as it was exposed to air. Her beautiful yellow sweater, a labor of love from her grandmother, who had spent months knitting it by hand, was completely ruined. Her carefully braided hair was now a sticky, matted mess that would require professional help to repair. But beneath the shock and humiliation, something else had begun to stir. Maya had felt a familiar sensation, one she had not experienced. Since leaving Portland, the calm, focused energy that had always preceded her best performances in the kickboxing ring. Her breathing had begun to steady, her posture had straightened slightly, and her eyes had started to clear despite the paint that continued to drip from her hair. Brittany had been basking in her moment of triumph, accepting congratulations from her followers and posing for photos with the empty paint containers. She had been too caught up in the adulation to notice the subtle changes in Maya's demeanor, the way her shoulders had squared and her fists had begun to clench at her sides. The crowd had still been laughing and pointing, their attention focused on the spectacle of Maya's humiliation rather than any signs that the victim might be capable of retaliation. Maya had closed her eyes for just a moment, centering herself the way Master Kim had taught her during her first week of training 6 years ago. She had recalled his voice, calm and steady, explaining that true strength came not from anger or hatred, but from the quiet confidence that came with years of disciplined practice. She had remembered the feeling of perfect balance, the satisfaction of executing a complex combination with flawless technique, the respect she had earned from opponents who had initially underestimated her based on her size and quiet demeanor. When Maya had opened her eyes, something fundamental had shifted. The paint still dripped from her hair and face, her clothes were still ruined, and the crowd was still laughing at her expense. But for the first time in months, Maya had felt like herself again. Not the timid, frightened girl who had been trying to blend into the background at Jefferson High, but the confident, capable young woman who had spent 6 years learning that size and appearance meant nothing when matched against skill, determination, and the element of surprise. Maya had wiped paint from her eyes with the back of her hand, clearing her vision enough to look directly at Brittany for the first time since arriving in the courtyard. Her gaze had been steady and unflinching, carrying an intensity that had made several nearby students take an unconscious step backward. The nervous laughter had begun to fade as people had sensed a change in the atmosphere, a shift from cruel entertainment to something that felt potentially dangerous. "Are you finished?" Maya had asked, her voice clear and strong, despite the paint that continued to drip from her chin. The question had carried undertones that most of the crowd had not understood, but which had made Brittany's confident smile falter slightly. There had been something in Maya's tone, a quiet authority that seemed completely at odds with the meek, frightened girl they thought they knew. Brittany had recovered quickly, her social instincts telling her that any sign of uncertainty would undermine her position as the alpha in this situation. She had laughed, a sound that was perhaps a bit too loud and forced, and had gestured dismissively at Maya's paint-covered form. "Oh, we're just getting started," she had replied, though there had been a note of uncertainty in her voice that had not been there moments before. Maya had nodded slowly, as if Brittany's response had confirmed something she had been hoping to hear. She had begun to move then, not away from the confrontation as everyone had expected, but closer to the center of the circle where Brittany stood with her followers. Her steps had been measured and deliberate, each one bringing her closer to a reckoning that had been building for months. The crowd had sensed the change in energy, the way the atmosphere had shifted from cruel entertainment to something that felt like the calm before a storm. Conversations had died away as students had found themselves holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Even Brittany's followers had begun to look uncertain, their earlier confidence replaced by a growing awareness that they might have pushed too far this time. Maya had stopped just arm's length away from Brittany, close enough that she could see the slight tremor in the older girl's hands, the way her eyes had begun to dart around the courtyard as if looking for an escape route. For a moment, the two girls had stood facing each other in silence, the entire courtyard holding its collective breath as they waited to see who would make the next move. And in that moment, as Maya had stood there covered in paint, but radiating a quiet strength that none of them had suspected she possessed, everyone present had realized that they were about to witness something extraordinary. The shy, quiet girl they thought they knew was about to reveal exactly who she really was, and it was going to change everything at Jefferson High forever. Maya's silence stretched across the courtyard like a taut wire about to snap. The paint continued its slow descent down her face, but her breathing had become controlled and rhythmic, each exhale releasing months of suppressed frustration. Brittany's smirk wavered as she noticed the subtle transformation in Maya's posture, the way her shoulders had straightened and her feet had shifted into what anyone with combat training would recognize as a fighting stance. "What's wrong, Maya?" Brittany taunted, though her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you finally realizing that you don't belong here?" She gestured broadly at the impressive campus around them, the manicured lawns and modern buildings that spoke of privilege and wealth. Several students in the crowd nodded in agreement, their allegiance to the established social order overriding any sympathy they might have felt for the paint-covered girl standing before them. Maya wiped more paint from her eyes, her movements deliberate and precise. When she spoke, her voice carried a clarity that cut through the murmurs of the crowd like a blade. "You know what your problem is, Brittany?" The use of Brittany's first name, spoken with such calm authority, sent a ripple of surprise through the assembled students. No one challenged Brittany directly, especially not someone covered in paint and humiliated in front of half the school. Brittany's face flushed with anger at the perceived disrespect. "Excuse me? You think you can talk to me like that after what you did to my clothes?" She stepped closer to Maya, using her 5-inch height advantage to loom over the smaller girl. Her followers moved with her, creating an intimidating wall of perfectly dressed privilege. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Maya's response was a soft laugh that somehow managed to sound more dangerous than any shout or threat. "Actually, I think you're the one who has no idea what they're dealing with." She began to remove her ruined sweater, the paint-soaked fabric, peeling away to reveal a fitted black tank top underneath. The simple action drew gasps from several students who had never seen Maya in anything but loose, concealing clothing. For the first time, Maya's true physique was visible. 6 years of intensive kickboxing training had sculpted her small frame into something that resembled a work of art. Her arms showed defined muscle that spoke of countless hours hitting heavy bags and speed bags. Her shoulders were broad for her size, tapering to a narrow waist that suggested core strength most athletes would envy. But it was her stance, that truly caught the attention of anyone who understood fighting. Perfectly balanced, weight distributed evenly, ready to move in any direction at a moment's notice. Emma Rodriguez had been watching the confrontation from the edge of the crowd, her heart pounding with anxiety for her friend. When Maya removed her sweater and revealed her athletic build, Emma's mouth fell open in shock. How had she missed this? How had quiet, bookish Maya been hiding such obvious physical conditioning? The pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even known existed began falling into place in Emma's mind. Coach Martinez, the school's wrestling and self-defense instructor, had been walking past the courtyard when the commotion drew his attention. He stopped at the edge of the crowd, his experienced eye immediately recognizing what others were only beginning to understand. Maya's stance, her breathing, the way she held her hands. This was not a scared teenager about to be bullied. This was a trained fighter who had been pushed beyond her breaking point. Brittany, however, remained oblivious to the danger she was courting. Her world of social media followers and designer clothes had never included anyone who could pose a physical threat to her carefully constructed reality. She saw Maya's transformation as nothing more than a desperate attempt to appear tough, a pathetic last resort from someone who had already lost the battle for social standing. "Oh, please," Brittany scoffed, though several of her followers had begun to look uncertain. "You think taking off your ugly sweater makes you intimidating? You're still the same pathetic loser who can't afford decent clothes." She reached out to shove Maya backward, confident that the smaller girl would stumble and fall, providing even more entertainment for the crowd. Maya's reaction was so fast that most of the students watching didn't fully comprehend what they had seen until it was over. As Brittany's hand moved toward her shoulder, Maya shifted slightly to the left, while simultaneously raising her right arm in a motion that redirected Brittany's push harmlessly past her body. The technique was called a simple deflection in kickboxing. Terms, but executed with such precision and timing that Brittany found herself stumbling forward, thrown off balance by her own momentum. The crowd erupted in surprised exclamations as Brittany windmilled her arms, trying to regain her footing. She managed to avoid falling completely, but the graceful confidence she had projected moments earlier was shattered. For the first time in the confrontation, she looked genuinely rattled, her perfect hair disheveled and her designer outfit wrinkled from her near fall. "How did you?" Brittany began, but Maya was already moving again. This time, it was Maya, who stepped closer, eliminating the distance between them with a fluid grace that made it clear she was completely comfortable in close-quarters situations. Brittany instinctively tried to back away, but found herself bumping into Jessica, who had been standing directly behind her. Maya's voice remained calm, almost conversational, as she addressed not just Brittany, but the entire crowd that had gathered to witness her humiliation. "You want to know something interesting about assumptions? People look at me and see what they expect to see. Quiet girl, keeps to herself, probably afraid of her own shadow." She gestured to the paint that still covered her face and hair. "Easy. Target for someone who gets their kicks from making others miserable." The courtyard had fallen completely silent, except for the sound of Maya's voice carrying clearly across the space. Even students who had been passing by on their way to other destinations had stopped to watch, sensing that something significant was happening. Cell phones that had been recording Maya's humiliation were now capturing something entirely different. A transformation that none of them had anticipated. "But here's the thing about assumptions," Maya continued, her gaze moving slowly across the faces in the crowd before settling back on Brittany. "They're usually wrong. And when you base your actions on wrong assumptions, you tend to make very poor decisions." She took another step forward, and this time Brittany couldn't back away because her followers were hemming her in on all sides. Ashley Park, one of Brittany's closest friends, tried to inject herself into the situation. "You need to back off right now," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Brittany's dad is on the school board. You have no idea what kind of trouble you're asking for." The threat was real. Brittany's father did indeed wield considerable influence in the district and had a reputation for using that influence to protect his daughter from consequences. Maya turned her attention to Ashley with the same calm intensity. She had focused on Brittany. "And you need to understand that some things are more important than avoiding trouble." Her voice carried a weight of conviction that made Ashley take an involuntary step backward. "Sometimes standing up for yourself is worth whatever consequences might follow." Emma had been fighting her way through the crowd, trying to reach Maya's side. She finally broke through the inner circle just as Maya finished speaking, her face flushed with exertion and worry. "Maya, what's happening? Are you okay?" She took in her friend's paint-covered appearance and the tense standoff with Brittany's group, trying to understand how the situation had escalated so quickly. Maya's expression softened slightly when she saw Emma's genuine concern. "I'm fine. Better than I've been in months, actually." She gestured to the paint covering her clothes and skin. "Brittany and her friends decided to give me a makeover. I was just explaining to them why that was a mistake." Emma's eyes widened as she processed the implications of Maya's words and posture. Her friend, quiet, studious Maya, who preferred books to parties and spent her free time in the library, was standing toe-to-toe with the most popular girl in school like she owned the place. The confidence radiating from Maya was unlike anything Emma had ever seen from her. Brittany had been using the interruption to regain her composure, smoothing her hair and adjusting her clothes. The near fall had been embarrassing, but she convinced herself it had been a fluke, a lucky move by someone who had clearly been taking self-defense classes at the local YMCA. She was not about to let some scholarship student make her look weak in front of the entire school. "This is ridiculous," Brittany announced, raising her voice to address the crowd. "Are we really going to stand here and let this freak threaten me?" She looked around at the assembled students, expecting the automatic support she had always received. Instead, she found faces filled with uncertainty and growing fascination with Maya's unexpected transformation. Madison Cooper, another of Brittany's inner circle, stepped forward with renewed confidence. At nearly 6 feet tall and built like the volleyball player she was, Madison had always served as Brittany's enforcer when situations required more than just social pressure. "Yeah, I think our little artist needs to learn some respect." Cracked her knuckles dramatically, a gesture that had intimidated numerous students over the years. Maya assessed Madison with the clinical detachment Master Kim had taught her to apply to every opponent. Height advantage, longer reach, probably stronger in raw terms, but almost certainly untrained and overconfident. Madison's posture screamed. Amateur. Weight shifted too far forward, hands positioned wrong for either attack or defense, telegraphing her intentions through obvious preparatory movements. "Madison, don't," Emma said urgently, recognizing the dangerous escalation in the confrontation. "This isn't worth it. Maya, please, let's just go to the administration office and report what happened." She grabbed Maya's arm, trying to pull her away from the increasingly volatile situation. Maya gently but firmly removed Emma's hand from her arm. "No, Em, I'm done running away. I'm done pretending that if I just keep my head down and don't make waves, people like this will leave me alone." Her voice carried 6 years of frustration, months of accumulated humiliation, and a growing determination to finally stand up for herself. The crowd had grown larger as word of the confrontation spread through the school's invisible communication network. Students were flowing into the courtyard from all directions, drawn by the promise of drama and the rare spectacle of someone actually challenging Brittany's authority. Teachers were notably absent. most of them in their classrooms, preparing for the next period or attending a faculty meeting in the main office. Coach Martinez remained at the edge of the crowd, his experienced eye tracking every nuance of Maya's body language and positioning. As a former military combatives instructor who had seen real violence in 2 overseas deployments, he recognized the signs of serious martial arts training when he saw them. Maya's breathing, her stance, the way she tracked multiple opponents simultaneously. This was not someone who had taken a few self-defense classes at the local community center. Madison made her move suddenly, lunging forward with a wild haymaker punch that would have been devastating if it had connected. Maya's response was so quick and fluid that many students missed the actual technique, seeing only the result. She slipped the punch by mere inches while simultaneously stepping inside Madison's guard, her left hand coming up to control the taller girl's wrist while her right hand found Madison's elbow. The throw that followed was textbook judo, adapted for the concrete surface of the courtyard. Maya used Madison's own momentum and weight against her, redirecting the larger girl's energy in a direction her body wasn't prepared to handle. Madison went down hard, her back hitting the concrete with a sound that made several students wince in sympathy. The impact knocked the wind out of her completely, leaving her gasping and struggling to understand what had just happened. The courtyard erupted in shocked exclamations and nervous laughter. Cell phone cameras that had been recording the confrontation went into overdrive, everyone trying to capture the moment when the quiet new girl had just thrown a 6-foot volleyball. Player like she weighed nothing. The video would be viral within hours, but at that moment, everyone was too stunned to think about social media implications. Maya stood over Madison's prone form, her expression showing no satisfaction or cruelty, only the calm focus of someone who had done exactly what they intended to do. "Stay down," she advised quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush that had fallen over the crowd. "You're not hurt, but you will be if you get up and try that again." Brittany stared at her fallen friend in complete disbelief. Madison was supposed to be the solution to this problem, the muscle that would put the weird new girl back in her place and restore the natural order of things. Instead, Madison was lying on the ground, looking dazed and defeated, while Maya stood over her, looking like she had barely exerted herself. Jessica Walsh, the third member of Brittany's inner circle, had been recording the entire confrontation on her phone. Unlike the other students who were capturing random moments, Jessica had been documenting everything systematically, planning to edit together a humiliation video that would destroy Maya's reputation permanently. The footage she had captured so far was not going according to plan. "You're insane," Brittany said, her voice cracking with a mixture of rage and growing fear. "You just assaulted Madison. You're going to be expelled for this. My father will make sure you never attend another decent school anywhere in the country." The threats were real. Brittany's family did have that kind of influence and had used it before to destroy the lives of people who crossed them. Maya's response was to smile, an expression that somehow managed to be both gentle and terrifying. "Your father can certainly try, but before he does, you might want to consider what the video of this incident is going to look like when it's reviewed by the administration." She gestured to the dozens of phones recording from every angle, especially the part where you and your friends threw paint on me without provocation. The reminder of the paint attack that had started the entire confrontation sent a chill through Brittany's group. In their focus on Maya's unexpected fighting ability, they had temporarily forgotten that they were the clear aggressors in the situation. Any objective review of the evidence would show Brittany and her friends committing what amounted to assault with the paint, while Maya had only responded with defensive actions. Emma had been watching the entire exchange with growing amazement and concern, Her quiet, bookish friend had just thrown a girl twice her size like it was nothing and was now calmly discussing legal implications while covered in paint. "Maya," she said softly, "where did you learn to do that?" Maya's expression softened as she looked at Emma, the intimidating fighter persona giving way to something more familiar and human. "It's a long story, Em. One I should have told you weeks ago." She glanced around at the crowd of fascinated faces surrounding them. "Maybe we can talk about it later, when we have some privacy." Madison had finally caught her breath and was struggling to sit up, her face flushed with embarrassment and pain. Maya immediately moved to help her, offering a hand up with no trace of animosity or gloating. "Take your time," she said gently. "That was a hard fall. Do you need me to get the nurse?" The gesture of concern for someone who had just tried to attack her sent another ripple of confusion through the crowd. This was not how fights were supposed to work in their experience. The winner was supposed to gloat and humiliate the loser, not offer medical assistance and genuine concern for their well-being. Madison stared at Maya's outstretched hand in confusion, trying to reconcile the person who had just thrown her to the ground with the same person who was now offering help. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted the assistance, allowing Maya to help her to her feet. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "If you can fight like that, why didn't you just stand up to Brittany weeks ago?" Maya's answer was directed at Madison, but her voice carried clearly enough for the entire crowd to hear. "Because I didn't want to hurt anyone. I came here hoping to have a normal high school experience, to make friends and focus on my studies, without having to prove anything to anyone." She gestured to her paint-covered appearance, but apparently some people interpret kindness as weakness, and they keep pushing until you have no choice but to push back. Coach Martinez had heard enough. As the only adult witness to the entire confrontation, he knew he needed to intervene before the situation escalated further or attracted the attention of administrators who might not understand the context. He pushed through the crowd with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed immediately. "All right, everybody, show's over," he announced in the voice that had commanded respect from soldiers and students alike. "Clear out and get to your next classes. Anyone I catch lingering in this courtyard is going to find themselves running laps until the sun goes down." The threat was enough to disperse most of the casual onlookers, though many continued to watch, from windows and doorways. Coach Martinez approached Maya directly, his expression unreadable. "Miss Chen, isn't it? I think you and I need to have a conversation." His tone was neutral, giving no indication whether she was in trouble or not. "Miss Sterling, you and your friends report to Principal Williams' office immediately. I'll be there shortly to discuss what happened here." Brittany opened her mouth to protest, to demand that Maya be arrested for assault, but something in Coach Martinez's expression stopped her. She had never seen the normally easygoing coach look so serious, and his tone suggested that arguing would only make her situation worse. With visible reluctance, she gathered her followers and headed toward the main building. Maya watched them go, then turned her attention to Coach Martinez. She had heard about him from other students, a fair teacher who didn't play favorites, but also didn't tolerate disrespect or laziness. Several students had mentioned that he had military experience, which might explain his calm reaction to what had just transpired. "Am I in trouble, Coach?" Maya asked, her voice returning to something closer to her normal quiet tone now that the immediate threat had passed. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving her aware of the paint drying in her hair and the stares of students watching from nearby buildings. Coach Martinez studied her for a long moment, taking in her stance, her breathing, the way she held herself even covered in paint and facing potential disciplinary action. "That depends," he said finally. "How long have you been training, and why didn't you mention it when you enrolled here?" The question caught Maya off guard. She had expected accusations or demands for explanations, not what sounded like professional curiosity. 6 years of kickboxing, she admitted. And I didn't mention it because I wanted to start fresh here. I was tired of being defined by what I could do in a fight. Emma, who had remained close by throughout the entire exchange, stared at her friend in amazement. 6 years? Maya? That's practically your entire teenage life. How did I not know this about you? The hurt in her voice was evident. They had been friends for months, sharing meals and study sessions, and Maya had never mentioned such a significant part of her background. Maya's expression showed genuine remorse as she looked at Emma. "I'm sorry, Em. I should have trusted you enough to tell you. I was just so tired of being the fighter girl everywhere I went. I wanted to be Maya the student, Maya the friend, Maya the person who reads too much and knows random historical facts." She gestured helplessly at her paint-covered state. "I guess that plan didn't work out so well." Coach Martinez nodded slowly, pieces of a puzzle falling into place in his mind. "You've been letting Brittany and her crew harass you for weeks, haven't you? Because you didn't want to reveal that you could handle yourself." When Maya nodded reluctantly, he shook his head in a mixture of admiration and frustration. "That shows remarkable restraint, Miss Chen, but also some pretty poor judgment about when that restraint stops being a virtue." The observation stung because Maya knew it was accurate. Her desire to avoid violence had led her to endure weeks of harassment that had affected her grades, her sleep, and her mental health. The irony was not lost on her that her attempt to avoid being defined by her fighting ability had led directly to a situation where fighting was the only viable option. "What happens now?" Maya asked, dreading the answer. She could already imagine the phone call to her mother, the disciplinary hearing, the possible suspension or expulsion that would destroy any chance of the fresh start she had sought. Her mother worked 2 jobs to afford their apartment in this district, and being kicked out of Jefferson would be a devastating blow to their family's carefully constructed stability. Coach Martinez glanced around the courtyard, noting the students still watching from various vantage points and the obvious evidence of the paint attack that had started the entire confrontation. "Now we go have a conversation with Principal Williams. And you," he pointed at Emma, "come with us. Miss Chen is going to need someone to vouch for her character, and you seem to be the closest thing she has to a friend at this school." As they walked toward the main building, Maya caught sight of her reflection in one of the windows lining the courtyard. The girl looking back at her was almost unrecognizable, paint-covered, disheveled, but standing straighter and moving with more confidence than she had shown since arriving at Jefferson High. For the first time in months, she looked like herself. Again, the hallways they passed through buzzed with whispered conversations as students who had witnessed the confrontation shared details with those who had missed it. Maya could feel eyes following her progress, but the attention felt different than the pitying or mocking stares she had endured for weeks. There was curiosity now, and something that might have been respect. Emma walked beside her in thoughtful silence, clearly processing everything she had learned about her friend in the span of 20 minutes. "Maya," she said finally, "when you said you wanted to start fresh here, what exactly were you starting fresh from?" Maya hesitated, knowing that a complete answer would require revealing parts of her past she had hoped to leave behind in Portland. Competition fighting, regional, tournaments, a reputation as someone you didn't want to cross. She paused, then added more quietly, "An incident at my last school that I've been trying to live down ever since." The admission hung in the air between them as they approached Principal Williams' office. Maya knew that within the next hour, her carefully constructed new identity would be completely stripped away. Everyone at Jefferson High would know exactly who Maya Chen really was, and she would have to live with whatever consequences followed from that revelation. But as she walked down the hallway, with paint still drying in her hair and the satisfied exhaustion that followed a well-executed technique still flowing through her muscles, Maya realized that she was no longer afraid of those consequences. For the first time since arriving at Jefferson High, she felt like herself again, and that was worth whatever price she might have to pay. Principal Williams sat behind his mahogany desk, reviewing security footage on his computer screen for the third time. The video showed everything. Brittany's calculated paint attack, Maya's restrained response, Madison's aggressive advance, and the defensive throw that ended the confrontation. His 20 years in education had taught him to recognize when a situation was more complex than it initially appeared. Maya sat across from him, having cleaned most of the paint from her face, but still wearing evidence of the attack on her clothes and hair. Emma flanked her left side, while Coach Martinez occupied the chair to her right. Brittany and her group waited in the outer office, their earlier confidence replaced by nervous energy as the gravity of their actions became clear. "Miss Chen," Principal Williams began, closing the laptop and folding his hands. "Your academic record from Portland shows no disciplinary issues. Your teachers here describe you as respectful and hardworking. Can you explain how we ended up in this situation?" Maya chose her words carefully. "I've been dealing with harassment for weeks, sir. Today, it escalated beyond what I could ignore." She gestured to her stained clothing. "I defended myself using minimal force necessary to stop the attack." Coach Martinez leaned forward. "Principal Williams, I witnessed the entire incident. Miss Chen showed remarkable restraint. She could have seriously injured Miss Cooper, but instead used a controlled technique designed to neutralize the threat, without causing lasting damage." Principal Williams nodded slowly. The security footage supported this assessment. Maya's actions had been defensive and proportionate. "Miss Sterling's father has already called demanding your expulsion. He's threatening to involve the school board." He paused, studying Maya's calm expression. "However, the evidence clearly shows his daughter initiated the assault." Emma spoke up for the first time. "Maya never fought back before today. She just took whatever they threw at her. Literally, as it turns out." Her voice carried both admiration and concern for her friend's months of silent suffering. The principal's intercom buzzed. "Sir, Mr. Sterling is here demanding to see you immediately." His secretary's voice carried a note of apology for the interruption. "Send him in," Principal Williams replied, then looked directly at Maya. "I want you to remain calm, Miss Chen. Let me handle this." Richard Sterling burst through the door with the aggressive confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way, through intimidation and financial influence. His expensive suit and perfectly styled hair projected power, but his red face betrayed his fury at having his daughter challenged by someone he considered beneath his family's social status. "Williams, I want that girl arrested immediately," he demanded without preamble. "She assaulted my daughter and threw Madison Cooper to the ground. This is completely unacceptable, and I won't tolerate violence in a school district where I contribute significantly to the budget." Principal Williams remained seated, his expression neutral. "Mr. Sterling, please sit down. We need to discuss what actually happened today." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sterling remained standing, using his height to loom over the seated group. "I know exactly what happened. That girl," he pointed accusingly at Maya, "attacked Brittany and her friends unprovoked. I have witnesses, and I want her expelled immediately." Actually," Principal Williams said calmly, "I have security footage that tells a very different story." He turned his laptop around, showing the screen to Sterling. "Your daughter and her friends threw paint on Miss Chen without provocation. That constitutes assault under California law." Sterling's face grew redder as he watched the video, his certainty wavering as the evidence contradicted his daughter's version of events. That's just school spirit, kids being kids, but physical violence is completely different. Coach Martinez stood up, his military bearing evident as he faced Sterling. "Sir, your daughter's friend threw the first punch." Miss Chen defended herself with admirable restraint. In my professional opinion, she could have done far more damage, but chose not to. Maya finally spoke, her voice steady and respectful. "Mr. Sterling, I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to finish my senior year peacefully. Your daughter chose to escalate a situation that could have been resolved with a simple apology months ago." Sterling turned his attention to Maya for the first time, his expression shifting as he took in her calm demeanor and respectful tone. This wasn't the violent troublemaker he had expected to encounter. You threw Madison Cooper. She's 6 feet tall and an athlete." "Yes, sir, I did. She was attacking me, and I stopped her using the minimal force necessary. I checked on her afterward to make sure she wasn't seriously hurt." Maya's honesty seemed to catch Sterling off guard. Principal Williams stood up, asserting his authority in the situation. "Mr. Sterling, after reviewing all available evidence, I'm prepared to suspend your daughter for 3 days for the paint incident. Miss Chen will receive no disciplinary action as she was clearly acting in self-defense." The room fell silent as Sterling processed this unexpected reversal. His threats and bluster had failed to achieve the outcome he demanded, and the evidence clearly supported the school's position. "This isn't over, Williams. The school board will hear about this." "I'm sure they will," Principal Williams replied calmly. "And they'll see the same evidence I've seen. Miss Chen, you're free to go. I'd suggest getting that paint out of your hair before it sets permanently." As Sterling stormed out, Maya felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't realized. She'd been carrying. The confrontation she had dreaded for months was over, and she had emerged not just unscathed, but vindicated. Emma hugged her tightly as they left the office. "I can't believe you've been dealing with this alone for so long. Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me?" Maya returned the embrace, feeling the warmth of genuine friendship. "I thought I could handle it by staying invisible. I was wrong." She looked at Coach Martinez, who had waited to walk out with them. "Thank you for standing up for me, Coach." Coach Martinez smiled, the first truly relaxed expression he'd shown all day. "Miss Chen, would you be interested in helping me start a self-defense program for students who've been dealing with bullying? Your story might inspire others to find their own strength." Maya considered the offer, realizing that her attempt to hide her abilities had only prolonged her suffering. "I'd like that, Coach. Maybe it's time I stopped running from who I am." 3 weeks later, Maya stood in front of Jefferson High's first anti-bullying assembly, no longer the paint-covered victim, but a confident young woman sharing her story. The auditorium was packed, and she could see Brittany sitting in the back row, having returned from her suspension noticeably more subdued than before. "Strength isn't about how hard you can hit," Maya told the assembled students. "It's about standing up for yourself and others when it matters most. Sometimes that means walking away. Sometimes it means speaking up. And sometimes it means being ready to defend yourself when all other options are exhausted." The applause that followed was genuine and sustained. As Maya left the stage, she caught Emma's proud smile and Coach Martinez's approving nod. For the first time since arriving at Jefferson High, she felt like she truly belonged. Later that afternoon, Maya received a text from an unknown number. "Respect. Sorry for everything. M." She recognized it as coming from Madison, who had been surprisingly civil since their confrontation. Maya typed back a simple response. "Forgiven. Thanks for speaking up." As she walked home that evening, Maya reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few weeks. The shy girl who had tried to hide her abilities was gone. replaced by someone who understood that true strength came from knowing when and how to use your power responsibly. Her phone buzzed with a message from Emma. "Kickboxing lesson tomorrow? I want to learn from the best." Maya smiled, typing back, "Only if you're ready to work hard. No shortcuts in the dojo." The response came immediately. "Wouldn't expect anything less from my warrior friend." Maya laughed, realizing that being known as the girl who could fight was far better than being known as the girl who couldn't defend herself. She had learned that sometimes you have to break apart completely before you can become who you're truly meant to be. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.